todas las tribus, pueblos y razas, muchos vendrán a alabar, de tantas culturas, lenguas y naciones.
Welcome to this webinar with the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada. This is the second to last webinar in our COVID webinar series, as it were. We're glad you're here. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. C. Michael Hahn, Fellow of the Hymn Society, who's going to introduce our panelists for today. Dr. Hahn?
Thank you, Brian. I've been looking forward to this for a long time, and it's a privilege to get a chance to say just a few words about each of these friends. I first met Simei in 1994, I believe. It was in Nashville at a Global Praise event that was held there, and had some wonderful conversations that led to my own sojourn to Brazil, I think in 1998. And Simei then came and stayed with us and did some study at SMU. And we've had several interchanges beyond that point. When it comes to church music, Simei's done it all. She's a professor, been a professor, a composer. She's put collections of songs together. She has been involved in several significant groups, including being the worship coordinator for the World Council of Churches. Equally, though, she's also what the World Council calls an animateur, one that gives breath and life to congregational song in diverse global context. She never stops. I often will get a new song that she's written. She'll send to me. Most recently, she's published this little book, if I can get it right, with 85 translations of Charles Wesley songs. Simei grew up in the Amazon region in the north, in the Baptist context, and was nourished by some very good Baptists in that. She and her husband Jairo eventually, I think partly through Pablo Sosa, found their way into the Methodist fold. And Jairo has a wonderful sense of humor, and it's always fun to be with them. And she did some of her study then at ISADET with Pablo. I could go on a little bit more, but I'll only say that I've had the privilege when I was in Sao Paulo of having Simei be my personal bodyguard. We had a little experience on the streets there with an individual, and she decided that my height and my hat was attracting attention to certain kinds of people. And so she said, I think all 4'10" of Simei stood behind me then and walked protecting me as we walked through the streets of Sao Paulo. So you have not experienced Simei until she's been your bodyguard. Then I'm equally excited to introduce Marcell. Marcell Silva Steuernagel comes from a different parts and a different experience in Brazil, which of course is so diverse. So he comes more from the south and has a Lutheran background, but once again, a very ecumenical spirit. Marcell is also one of those people that does it all. He's a composer, he's a performer, he's a thinker. I wish I had his new book. It's not yet out, or I would show that to you as well. And I'm really privileged that following his PhD at Baylor and all of his other study and experiences, which includes everything from Brazilian guitar and jazz and composition training, the church music experience and the field, that he is in the position that I once had at Perkins, and it's very exciting to know what's going on there and the kind of things that he's doing. I haven't known him for as long. I don't know what you were doing in 1994, Marcell, but
I don't remember.
But I will say that in a very short time, I really feel that not just a colleague, but a friend in ministry. If you are not noticing it, you should be reading the hymn regularly, and seeing the contributions that Marcell is making to congregational music, and also are thinking about this in his columns that are there. So thank you all, and I'm going to get out of the way and look forward to your conversation and sharing.
Thank you, Michael. Simei, is it okay if I get us started?
Yes.
Okay. So I just want to say that this is a real pleasure. You know, I personally, I know we're not supposed to reintroduce whoever's been introduced, but Simei is a person that I knew from hymnal pages long before I met her in person. It's a name that comes up when we're singing in Brazil, when we're working with hymnody and hymnology. So this is a real pleasure. We've been in touch about talking about different things for the past couple of years. And it's a privilege for me to be able to interact with her. I want to say two things about what we're going to do today, and then I'll pass it over to Simei to get us started. We want to, the first is the structure of what we want to do. We want to talk a little bit about the reality of church music in Brazil, what it looks like on the ground, what are some of the challenges in local congregations and in Brazil at large. We want to give you a glimpse into what the profession or the practice, I think it's a better term, of church music looks like in a different part of the world. For me, it was a very almost surreal experience moving to the United States and seeing all the infrastructure that is connected to church music here. So we're going to give you a different flavor from Brazil. And the second thing we want to do is talk a little bit about this idea of global song and cultural justice, which ties very strongly to Simei's own work and her own history, and to the things that I've been writing about in the hymn as well. And we want to further that conversation. So that's our outline. The other thing I want to say is I'm just going to own it. We're going to improvise because that's what we do. And we wanted to improvise in front of you. We had a set of preliminary conversations kind of mapping out where we want to go. But the way that Brazilians play music and interact with each other is by improvising. And we take it as a badge of honor. And we're very thankful that you're willing to listen to us do that for an hour or just over an hour. So thank you all for being here. And I'm going to pass it over to Simei.
Are you listening to me? No, mute. Okay. Now
Yes.
it's okay. Oh, sorry. It's a pleasure to be invited to participate in this meeting online, and I'll try to be very clear, but sometimes perhaps we need to interact a little bit in order to, or you can raise questions or take notes about what am I saying. So I will start with the reality of the music in Brazil. So I started working in the church music in a local parish when I was 18 years old. Only in the choir, of course. I was singing in the choir, but sometimes we have only one choir director. So sometimes they need me to also lead the choir. So I start doing this without any preparation, just or practicing or observing what the others were doing. So late, when I was studying sacred music, I went to the seminar after other studies in music and also in literature and languages. I decided to get a better formation in music, sacred music, as we said in Brazil. It's okay? You're listening, okay? And then I start to also look for a way to express the music through songs and poems. I belong to a family that have several musicians. So we have this in the family. So we like to music and we like to play and to sing. Despite of being potentially a music minister, I always worked at the church in a voluntary basis. Because, you know, Brazil don't have all this necessary structure. We need to pay musicians, professional musicians. So I was working in this voluntary base. Late, I became a professor or a teacher in the schools of theology, several ones, and also in the conservatory. So I could improve my profession. Also, I discovered during the time I was in the seminar that it was possible to create a new structure of poetry. You know, we have much more translations in our hymnals. When you can see the translations we have in Portuguese, not all are good. Sometimes it's very difficult to discover the beauty of the poem because the translation is not really good. In Brazil, most of the church music is led by volunteers. As I said, myself was. Organists, pianists, choir leaders, or players, instrumental players. Some of our churches can afford a music minister. We have some churches and denominations that they have a good structure, they have a choir director, they have a paid minister, and they have several musicians. And even a school of music. In some churches, we can have a school of music. Nowadays, most of our musicians still are non-professional. They read music through the words and chords. That's what Marcell was saying. They have the ability to improvise because they don't read well. And if you agree to read a choir or a SATB structure in the piano for people that are not well trained, it's not easy for them. It's not like a melody accompaniment is much easier. But this, what we have in the hymnals, this structure of the hymn, and so the pianist and the organist need to went through this in order to get perform well. Nowadays, also, what we say, it's easier than in the past. Just mention that when I started being a choir director, I used the paper they used to do a house plant, you know? So I use this kind of paper and very thin in order to write the music and send to print. There is no photocopy or doing another kind of copies. Today, the musicians are, as I said, using much more what they find in the internet and tutorials for performing a song, a hymn. We can find all kinds of help through the internet. Choir can find voices, each group of voices. Also, most of these musicians, they don't have a theological formation. They are really just normal people in the church. So only those that go to special studies and seminars, they can also connect theology and music clearly. But right now, today, so in the structure of preparing worship in the church, some years ago, when I was a young person, was the pastor prepared the order of the worship, chose the hymns from the hymnal according to what he will be preaching, and then the order of the worship was built, and people come to worship in the church. That was normal. There's no external interference. But now what you see, that because we have an external interference in this worship, we have now developed not more anymore a leader in charge of the music in the church, but a group. They have different ideas, so they need to connect with one another in order to get an idea about the message they want to pass through the hymns. And there is a kind of, let's say, ministry for these groups to the local church. Are you hearing the noise? Someone is beating my upstairs. So through the internet, YouTube, and all this music coming through the media, they are more exposed to influence from external influence. So they bring to the church what they like to sing, what they listen CDs and other medias. So the pastor sometimes cannot even, he doesn't know what kind of a repertoire. I don't know how you pronounce this, repertoire of the amount of material they have. The pastor sometimes don't know all the hymns and themes they are singing.
Repertoire.
Yeah, repertoire. We have a few editions. Now we have less hymnals coming up. So, and we don't have also a hymnal that has just the melody and chords that could help these people. But we have much more complete music in the hymnals. So in the congregations, our congregation always sing in unison. They don't sing in parts. They sing in unison. The only group that is singing in part is the choir or the choirs. We have sometimes 2 or 3 choirs. So we are more and more shifting from a song leader, which conducts the music in the church, to a performing group that comes to the church to perform themselves. We have a few number of churches that have hymn books in the pews. So they don't have this. But in the past, we have a Bible and hymnals together in the pews, but now only Bibles. The choirs are performing much more now as a kind of show with cantatas, dance, and so it's much more a show to invite people, non-believers, to come to the church and be converted. So this is made in the name of evangelization. So the choirs are more more and more reduced to prepare Easter, Christmas, or big events than regularly sing each Sunday in the church and help the congregation to sing. So the choirs, the whole of the choirs are reduced to this. So I would like to ask Marcell if he has the same impression or he would like to add something to my short exposition about this music in Brazil.
Thank you, Simei. Yeah, I think, it's important to highlight the particular mixture of the components that go into Brazilian church music. There's that, the strong missionary influence, and Simei mentioned a couple of things. In fact, Simei worked with and learned from one of the most important music missionaries to Brazil, Joanna Sutton, who was a Baptist music missionary, studied at Baylor University in the 50s, and Simei had the privilege of working with her, learning from her. She was a person who translated a significant number of hymns to Portuguese. And so there's this, the missionary influence, the SATB choral, piano-driven sort of music apparatus. Then you have the influence of the African diaspora. And we have to remember that while the slave trade in Brazil and the US, those are the two largest slave trades in the Americas. But the way that this played out in society was very different in Brazil than it was here in the US. So you have that influence in terms of the music culture. The element of improvisation, I think, is foundational to how we think about music making in Brazil. I consider Brazilians to be extremely musical, but they are musical in ways that are different from North American markers of musicalness or musicality, especially from the academic perspective, right? So singing in 4-part harmony, being able to read written music. In Brazil, if I go play a worship gig, it is expected that I will improvise on the guitar. It's not expected that I will play the introduction the same way twice. So when I got here and had to play it like on YouTube, I was extremely annoyed. I still am annoyed. So this improvisational character to the music making shows up melodically. As Simei said, we don't usually sing in 4 parts, sometimes 2-part harmonies, but the melody gets improvised on in different ways. And the lack of the infrastructure or the apparatus that accompanies music making changes the way we think about resources, the way we think about the professional aspect of church music. So, for example, for a good while in my denomination, I was one of a handful of people that were in full-time music ministry when I was in church work in Brazil, which I did for a long time. And the church didn't hire me to play the piano. The church hired me to pastor musicians. The church hired me to develop a volunteer base. That's what I did. My main job was not playing the piano or conducting the choir. My main job was having coffee with people. It was my role to develop the volunteer base. And we had about 200 people in music ministry. So yeah, I think it's the MacGyver principle, right? You have a Xerox machine, 2 paper clips, and a piece of gum, and you make it work. That's kind of how we think about resources, which has its advantages. It also has its disadvantages, because there are certain types of projects that we just don't think about taking on because they rely too much on certain ways of making music. On the other hand, wherever you go, someone will have a guitar, or music kind of happens in that kind of improvisational way. But it is extremely volunteer based, and the assumption is that you will, you're going to copy whatever you need. So if someone comes to the US and buys a copy of a book, you can bet that book is going to make the rounds in Brazil. It's going to be copied over and over and over and over and shared, because who in Brazil has the money to buy $100 book? And even if they do, your board, your church board, won't approve the purchase. So whatever. The way we think about copyright and professionalism, I think, is very different than it is here. The other thing that I want to bring to this conversation about church music in Brazil is the role of the Christian music market, right? So if you think of the history of the Christian music industry in the US and the way that it developed in relation to the music industry, the copyright industry, the publishing industry, and in Brazil, it arrived a little bit later, and it became a huge phenomenon. So I can say with authority that we have our own contemporary Christian music industry that is related to the American industry, but it's also very much its own thing, with its own artists, its own circuits, its own celebrities. And sometimes these are frequently based on their American counterparts, but not always. And it's a market that has a huge influence on how church music gets played and consumed in Brazil, right? So theologically, that means that a lot of times church either align with this phenomenon, which we call it gospel, which comes from the American gospel, but it's not related to gospel at all. It's just the word that was transplanted and trademarked in Brazil by a particular neo-Pentecostal denomination, and we use it as an umbrella term for, CCM in Brazil, contemporary Christian music. Now, that historical Protestant denominations don't necessarily sing all of that because there's a strong connection to the heritage of whatever denomination you're connected to, whether it be Methodist or Lutheran or Presbyterian, right? So I'm looking, I thought I would share this as an example. This is the new hymnal for the Lutheran Church in Brazil, which I helped to edit, came out in 2017. But if you look inside, so there's proof of everything Simei said. It's the melody. There are a few things in here that are 4-part, but for the most part, it's melody. And it's got the guitar chords on top of the music. Because when we put this together, we started all highfalutin with, SATB aspirations, but we realized that what people needed on a Sunday, be it in the countryside of Minas Gerais or Espírito Santo, or in the south of Brazil or in the north, they needed to be able to pick this up, find the hymn so that someone could accompany it to a simple accompaniment, either on the guitar or on the piano or whatever instrument you have at hand. So that changed the way we thought about the hymnal and what the hymnal needed to do for congregations, right? And when you look at the repertoire, it's a mix of this Western Christendom heritage with Latin American musics. There's some Simei Monteiro in there. And the idea, the Latin American musics that came to Brazil during the 60s, 70s, and 80s. There are a few global song pieces, not many. Some music by Lutheran composers, younger Lutheran composers in Brazil, and absolutely no American or Australian contemporary Christian music. It's just not in there. Part because we don't necessarily sing a lot of that in the Lutheran church, but also because if you want that, you just go to YouTube and grab it. You don't need the hymnal for that, right? So that market, the gospel market, we call it, is hugely influential and has changed the way that church musicians do their work in Brazil and the way that churches sing. Simei, I don't know if you want to add to that about the gospel market or the Christian music market.
Before going to the gospel market, I would like to try to depict a little bit historically the way theologically we went from one point to another. So, but just a comment on this. Also, the worship order is now in the screen. So we have prayers, the text of songs, and even announcements, always part of the worship. So in small communities, we have this very flexible way. I bet it is sometimes very nice, produced with images and beautifully, let's say, ornamented for the service of the church. Things that we in the past dreamed to have in a bulletin or order of worship, we have now in this temporary screen. So you don't need anymore to deal with paper, to deal with printing. And it's economically it's very easy to have this. We have a laptop and projection. In the music also, for musicians, they use tablets, they use a cell phone sometimes, and I'm saying this because the market brings this to the church, because all this material that would cost a lot of money now is available through the internet freely, so they can have a playback and sing in the church with a playback. Even an entire choir can sing with a playback. So they use this a lot. But I would like to shift a little bit to another aspect, that is the theology. So if we examine our hymnals and according to a theological themes and language, we can see three phases. Hymns, most translations that express confessional and traditional themes like the spiritual relationship with the soul and God, always in terms of individuals. It's I and God, I and Jesus, my Jesus, Jesus is mine, I belong to Jesus. It is most of our hymns, if you examine the text, are in this direction. So these hymnals, I'm referring to the old, not this new one that Marcell is pointing to it. This is the old, were produced in the 19th and 20th centuries. They are denominational, but the Inário Evangelical hymnal was a project to be a kind of interdenominational hymnal, but nowadays I think only Methodist Church uses it, because the Methodist Church in Brazil doesn't have any hymnal, denominational hymnal. This is incredible. We never. So, Mil Voces para Celebrar is the first Methodist hymnal in Brazil, because this collecting several different hymnals to produce this. But you don't have a Methodist hymnal in Brazil. It's strange, no? I don't know, but Methodist Church in Brazil is very ecumenical too. And in the 60s, in the 60s and 70s, was much more open to use interdenominational material. So the first block is represented by these hymnals. And the theology of it was the hope, the pilgrims, in earth in order to go to heaven. So we suffer, we have problems, but we go to heaven. So it was rooted in the missionary preaching about be saved. And be saved means to leave all the word behind and go and through Jesus, conversion to Jesus Christ, and then wait for heaven. We have another moment, another block that start to refer to the community of faith, the relationship among brothers and sisters, and the love of God for us, the Holy Spirit, the service to others, as an expression of God's love for the humanity. We have few of these hymns more imposed in the hymnals, more new, or not hymnals, but collection of hymns that was also produced in Brazil for during certain times. We have a collection of hymns that could bring new hymns to the church. Now we have also a block that is historically represented by a movement that I was part of it in the 70s that had the proposal of a new song, Nova Canção. So we would like to start to sing the dimension of the utopia, that the kingdom of God could be present in the earth, and the church was a sign of this presence of the kingdom in us, as the gospel says, the seed of the kingdom is among you. So we got this as a result of Vatican II improvements or discussion about cultures and inculturation. And also this movement has also roots in the idea of Brazilian music is ourselves. It represents our identity. So we start to write poems and hymns about the kingdom of God, the history and the seeds of the kingdom. Jesus in the order, and the music was Brazilian music. So this movement was not well accepted because of this, too much for the church that were also still in this moment of hope in the future to accept the kind of incarnation of the gospel on earth. And also because I can speak about this later, that is about the identity, cultural identity. That I'm a Christian, but I'm also Brazilian. What means that? But the question is that after this rejection came the market, and started media and the singers and ministering to the people, and theologically they find another possibility. So let's see again. Like the Pilgrim and John Bunyan, go through the earth, your hope in the future is a utopia. The kingdom of God is a utopia, but it's eschatologically. It's eschatological. Then they start to think about the kingdom of God being among us, to have a freedom, to have a joy, to be in community, to share, to give, to make social work, and then now we have the lift or the wormhole. That means you have such a praise experience, so strong, and then you go to the presence of God in a kind of exodus. So this music is brought mainly from the new Pentecostal church, because they would like to have this experience, being in the church, but not being in earth. Have a glimpse of heaven in the moment of the worship. So then this is very, let's say, I would like to say, the market discovered this possibility to get this artists. You know, the artists, we have a kind of aura. Sometimes, you know what is aura? Aura, como diz in English? How we say in English?
Yeah,
Aura.
an aura.
Aura. So it's impressive because let's try to understand the process of sacralization, a moment under the market interest and power. So what we sing in our churches today is much more an imposition of the market. It's not a selection made by a denomination. When participating in the performance of an artist, gospel artist, the Christian audience is inserted in the logic and culture of consumism. This consumism is attributed to emotional and religious meaning, listening to artists who are instruments of God. So the impression we have is that the pastors are losing their influence in the midst of congregation, because the artists are charismatic and they are instruments of God. They can preach, they can sing, they can give emotion to people. So then this enjoyment and the amusement in this kind of shows hold in the church or outside the church, could be in the church. It brings to a kind of religious experience that someone could say, and I heard this in Brazil, we don't need to go to church to worship. We can have this experience, listen to a good music and sacred music in this meaning of something from heaven. So this is my analysis of these moments, different moments of hymns and songs in the church. To have a very denominational, but also very theologically linked to the hope in the future. Then we have another moment when we try to have the kingdom of God visible among us in the relationship, in the community. There are a lot of emphasis in communitarian moments and things, and care and the service. But then came this kind of, again, the back of individualism. So we have individualism in the beginning, opening to others, and then again individualism, because this lift to heaven is each person enter. It's not a group. It's much more my experience. My experience with God in this moment, I was in the before the throne, as someone we would say. So this is my analysis of this, taking as a basis the theology and the language of the songs. So it's not important if you are correct singing in a correctly Portuguese, or you are singing a good music or some good melody, but it doesn't matter, because you repeat like a mantra. What do you know what is a mantra? A mantra? say this? Indian mantra, we repeat. So you have shows that have a huge group of people, and they believe this is worship for them. This is spiritual experience for them. They don't say this is not a show. We are worshiping God here. You have the ministers there, the artists, and we are happy with this. Anything more about this?
Simei, I have a question for you. Off script, of course. But before I ask that question, I want to answer. Seth asked about the repertoire among Protestants and Catholics. That connects to what Simei is saying. Of course, historically, among Protestants, there's a huge overlap, right? You open a Baptist, a Presbyterian, a Lutheran, and a hymnal, and Fanny Crosby is there, or Watts is there. You know, the Wesleys are there to some extent, and then you have a second body of hymnody that's a little more divided. For example, you know, Lutheran hymnody can mean a variety of things. Are we talking about German, you know, early Reformation era hymnody? Are we talking about Scandinavian Lutheran hymnody, which in the case of my denomination is strongly present in the hymnals? In fact, I've discovered that there are songs from that tradition that we sing in Portuguese that have never been translated into English, which was surprising to me. And then you have this new kind of gospel infused repertoire, which is also sung across the board. What's happening with the Catholics, Seth, to answer your question, is some of this market consolidation. So especially the Catholic charismatic renewal movement has tapped into that gospel aesthetic, and they have artists, you know, some of them are actually clergy, others are not, like Padre Marcelo Rossi. Others are lay performers like Tony Allison, are two examples of Catholic gospel artists.
Yes.
So especially within that charismatic renewal movement portion of the Catholic Church, there is some interlap. In the past, there was some overlap that flowed across liberation theology lines and Latin American theology. So where that was shared, then you had some sharing of that music as well. But Simei, my question for you. So we both have experience translating hymns into Portuguese. You have much more than I do. And I've had the opportunity to translate some classic hymnody, if you will, into Portuguese, but also some contemporary hymnody, contemporary songs, right? One reason why I do this is because of what I call a Google Translator congregational songs. You know, people will find something in English from Hillsong that they think is great. They'll put it into Google Translator and they'll try to make it fit. So one of the things that I've done is retranslate some of these songs into Portuguese so that they make sense according to the Brazilian voice and the cadence of the language, right? But I wanted to hear some of your experience on that translation aspect, because you got the best training, you know, with Joanne Sutton in learning how to think about translation, and it's something you're still doing. You know, the Mil Voces para Celebrar is very recent. How has the way you think about translating congregational songs changed or not changed over the years?
Yeah, I think I have a very good experience of this. Studying the seminar with John Sutton, I discovered Isaac Watts' hymns. And then I get access to, when I served the Wonder Cross, beautiful hymn, very impressive, poems, poetry. Then I discovered that in Cantor Cristão, the old Baptist hymn book, we have this hymn translated. But I could not recognize that was the same hymn because of this, what you said. We try to force in the translation that the words go into the music and they keep the meter. That's one of the problems I had with it. Charles Wesley. Some of the hymns I translated, I changed the meter in order to save the words, to keep the meaning. Otherwise, I will reduce the original text to 50% of the content. So the question of the meter, I need your help, Marcell. A camisa de força da métrica.
It's a straight jacket.
Yeah, for meter. So we made horrible translations in Portuguese because of this. Because Portuguese is a language more linearly standard than English, that is very packed. So then my experience with Isaac Watts was this, because in Portuguese, we had very old translation of his hymn. I need your help again, Marcell. Olhando o lenho crucial. I think only in Portuguese you can understand this. I don't know if we can translate into English. Olhando o lenho crucial no qual morreu da glória o rei. See all the... It's a game to understand it. Olhando o lenho crucial no qual morreu da glória o rei. So all the words are, the right place of the word are inverted. And then we can say in Portuguese, quando eu contemplo a rude cruz, onde morreste, ó Jesus, when I serve, I see the cross where you were crucified. So simple Portuguese text. But, because of translation, it was nobody like this hymn to sing. And my experience as a translator is that we needed to be sure that you first enter into the text itself, the original text, and then you try to build a poem with your own words, keeping the meaning. So we have this saying that o tradutor é traidor, tradutor é traditore in Italian. That means that you leave something behind. You get rid of something that sometimes is very important.
The translator is a traitor. Yeah.
Yeah, the translator is a traitor. So I cannot explain clearly the technique, but my experience with Charles Wesley poems is this is not only a question of translation, but it's a question of to make the text meaningful for today. If I'm translating a text from 18th century today, I needed to bring the text for today. So that's one of the advantages to translate Charles Wesley in the 21st century or 20th century. Because we can use a fresh language to say the same he said in the 18th century. Mm-hmm. I find this wonderful. There's one famous text from Charles Wesley that the first time he set into music. That's when at the house I sit. Quando em casa eu descanso. So meaningful in Portuguese. So it comes in another fresh language because today it's updated. So my experience is, it doesn't matter if it's old or new, but some hymns are very difficult to translate. Just mention one I translated from Chile, Rena Murray, Earth Prayer. Because of short verses, very meaningful, a lot of content, so it was difficult, but I got it. I got it into Portuguese, Earth Prayer, Oração da Terra. So this is about translation. I don't know if you have any other question about this experience of recreating.
Yeah.
Because it's art. This is the task, the work of art is bring it in another language with a kind of beauty.
I think the idea of recreating is a good way of saying it. It's funny that the examples that you gave, so before your Mil Voces came out, I retranslated When I Survey into Portuguese, because there's a contemporary version of that. And my version, ao contemplar a rude cruz em que meu Cristo se entregou, toda a riqueza que dei valor. It's a completely different version, but so that idea of recreating is a special kind of stewardship, because you're listening for the sound of the language, you're listening to how the culture pulls you in a particular direction, and you're also listening to the voice of the original composer. And I think that's an art. It's
Yeah.
and it also has to do. Simei, I'm going to move a little bit forward. We have a couple of minutes left, but I want to make sure we get our final say before we answer questions. When we think about this idea of what's missing from congregational song in Brazil, you mentioned the things that you've translated and the things you've wrote. What do you think is missing in what we're singing today, and in relation to what's happening in the world, maybe the environment, things like that?
Yeah. The second group I described has influenced by theology of liberation. Despite of the theology of liberation doesn't touch the question about ecology is not there, but justice is there. So a group of Christian writers, I was part of it, we had to think about new themes. So I wrote a song, and I'm not sure I dare to say that probably is the only hymn we have about the body. I wrote a hymn about the body, speaking about sensations and about the gift of God giving us a body, because I missed it in the hymns. It seems that we have only head, sometimes head and foot, we don't have an entire body. So I wrote a song, and Sheila Irena Murray, the group that is here, probably know her. She was very friend of mine, and she died, I think, 2 years ago. And she translated my song into English. That is the song about the body. You gave us this body. This body is your temple. We don't want it to be a prisoner of evil, but we want it to be free, to express all the possibilities of the body. I don't know, perhaps you all in Western hymnody, other songs and hymns about the body, but probably it's on the first one. In the earth also, the earth, the justice, the food, let's see more. So if you go to the index of this hymn book, we can see there are lots of new themes never appeared, that never appeared in a hymnal, much more incarnated. So I think these new themes are, we need to write more about this, about migrants, because I recently translated one from an author for the US. It's a woman, I can't remember her name, but she was, the hymn was speaking about Jesus flying to Egypt with the family as a migrant. So then I translate this hymn into Portuguese because it's very now, it's very, how to say, updated. It's very, the theme is very important for us in the church now. So my experience is that we tried, but I dare to say that the church still prefer to think about heaven and the another reality, and not really speak about our Christian testimony in the earth, in this world here.
And that's Simei, that's the classic struggle, right? You know, you see it in Brazilian theology and ecclesiology. When you think about the missionary heritage, not only in Brazilian church music, but in the way in the whole theological, from a broader theological perspective, that proclamation is sort of, we're here to share the word, but we don't mess with the politics and we don't address the social problems, which was characteristic of a lot of North American missionary work, not only in Brazil, but throughout the world. And I think creates that, it reinforces that narrative of, you know, of heaven and of not engaging with what's happening right now. And then you have the liberation perspective, or the missão integral, holistic mission perspective. And if you go back to, you know, the first Lausanne conference in 1974, and you look at the covenant, the theology of the covenant, you know, there's that clash is there. They had a fight. John Stott and René Padilla and others were arguing about what to include and what not to include. So I think those divides are still there. And because of neo-Pentecostalism, it's become more complex than it was, say, 20 or 30 years ago in Brazil.
Just a short comment. Translating Charles Wesley, I also discovered through my studies at Perkins, in the library, I also discovered that he have also all other authors speaking about. I discovered he wrote about the poor, several hymns about the poor. So let us make the poor our friends. And then we need what you need for each day, the food, the dressing. And I translate these hymns into Portuguese because there's another problem with hymnody. The editors, they have the power to select. So the editor house, they have the power to select it. Sometimes they reject a hymn because they think, oh, this is not very good. So I believe Charles Wesley have several of his stanzas cut because he was speaking about the social involvement of Christians. You know, he worked with prisoners and poor people. So it's a rediscovery the hymn, this. And we have in this hymnal I produced, we have really new hymns because we have poems that would never be set into music, and now they are, and you can sing in English and in Portuguese. So they are produced in Brazil, but you can, is a contribution to the hymnody in English language. Do you understand what I mean? So some other authors, like John Wesley itself, translate from German. I don't know how to say in German, but it's this about leave all your fears. Your Fears Away. You know this famous hymn from one of German authors, and John Wesley translated. And when I translate in Portuguese, I use the word angústia, depressão. Are you still in depression? Why? The hymn asks this. Why are you still in depression? Trust in God. Huh? So it's in the hymnal. So the question about new themes, maybe it's also old one. But I have a question for you. I don't know if I have time to raise this question. Marcell, in your article, when you speak about broadening the scholar thinking about expanding the canon of hymnody to other countries, the rest of the world. And we have a beautiful expression of Pablo Sosa saying that the music is important too, is language. I would like to ask you if, for me, this is my interpretation, the Oxford movement was a very inclusive movement because they tried to recover the old ancient hymns with a kind of respect. So we have Quanta Qualia, we have Stabat Mater, we have Forefathers Love Begotten. We have several ancient hymns that were brought in the book Hymns Ancient and Modern, and it was a success in England as much as I know. So people enjoy this old, and also he included Luther hymns from Germany that was so to be open to the others was happening in the past, and this new opening is because we closed too much. We became like an island with concepts, specific concepts about what is a hymn. And now we want to open to include others into our hymnody. But I have another comment to that. For us in the South, the movement is the opposite, because you want to include from the rest of the world into the Western hymnody. But we want to get rid of what we were invaded by and get a little bit ready to do our own music. So how you see this movement, opposite movements?
That's a great question. Thank you. So I kind of see it as uma rua de duas mãos. You're coming and you're going. When I think of what has to be done from the academic perspective, in circles like the Hymn Society and other circles where we're discussing congregational song, in the classrooms, in seminaries, especially in North America, that still kind of concentrates a lot of the systematic thinking about these things. I think we have to pursue that decolonial perspective and continue this process of requalifying the way we think about congregational music, right? And for example, today I was with a student in my office who did two analyses, one of a classic Wesley hymn and one of a contemporary worship song. And the student was asking, what criteria do I use? And I said, contemporary musicology refers to things like the grain of the voice, vocality, texture, production, when we're analyzing contemporary music, pop music, right? So I think there's a lot of work to be done developing the criteria we need to think theologically about congregational song and push back against the colonial drive to simply say, yes, this is what the missionary said, so this is what we do. On the other hand, my role in the South, my role as a Brazilian composer and teacher is to write music and teach others how to write music. So a lot of my work in Brazil has to do with mentoring younger musicians and helping congregations create, recreate, and their own music, so that we have some sort of ground on which to stand with all these influences coming in. And I think we're starting to see, I see promising signs when I think of young composers who are writing congregational song in Portuguese for Brazilian churches. So I think we have to work at both sides at the same time, right? And then there's a third thing, Simei, which is being able to have long, systematic conversations, right? So when I think, for example, about our work together and the conversations that we have back and forth, it's not one conversation, because these are very complex issues. And when we go back and we go forth, and it's back and forth, and you'll send me something on WhatsApp, and then I'll look, and then I'll go back, and then you ask me, and then you ask, you say this book is good, and I didn't. So I think that process, that kind of covenant, of that kind of partnership is very important, because it allows us to do both of those things at the same time. I mean, there's more we could say about that, but I think it's work on both counts. Brian, I see you on the screen.
Yeah, I wanted to highlight a couple of questions that have come in before we run out of time. The first one, and I'm actually going to follow it up with a question of my own that I think is related. Comes from Lynn. She says, in what way is Brazilian Portuguese church music similar to and related to or different from Latin American Hispanic church music? And my question is similar, or maybe touches on the same kind of point. As Americans, we're notorious for not understanding global cultures. Like we're the bad tourists, that's like one of our stereotypes. But there is a huge tendency for Americans to understand Latin America as kind of a monolith, and oftentimes Brazil is clumped into Latin America. And so when I look at a hymnal in America, like I was just looking through All Creation Sings, the New Lutheran Supplement, and there's like one or two Brazilian songs in there that I could find. There may be more, but there's definitely one or two. And there's many more Spanish language songs from various places. And so my question, I guess, is in what ways are we being led astray to understand Brazilian congregational song by the very, very few songs that actually show up in our American repertoire? Like For the Troubles and the Suffering of the World is like the Brazilian song for us. It's like, let's do something Brazilian for the troubles and the suffering of the world, which is a great hymn, but that's like the only one that started getting incorporated relatively quickly. Or there's a few more examples, but anyways, I wonder if those two questions are related, if y'all could chew on those.
Yes. Can I start? And Marcell can. Brazil is huge country, and it's very diverse in terms of arts, culture, and music. If you go to Bahia, you think you are in Africa, because 90% of the population is black. If you go to the south, I don't know if Marcell will approve, you think you are in German sometimes, or in Curitiba. If you are in Germany, you are in Europe, because of the immigrants, the presence of immigrants. If you go to the Amazon, you go to the indigenous communities, you think you are in an indigenous surrounding group. So we have all this diversity, and even for us Brazilians, we don't know well our culture, our music, our elements that we can use for composing. Why? Because it was never taught in the schools of music. We learn in the schools of music, European music, Marcell, except for some professors, some teacher that open our eyes. They say, it's possible. Or I compose, or listen to Villa-Lobos or others. But one of the problems I had when I studied music was the question about the scales, no? The keys and the scales that you have you study harmony and say there's cadence, perfect cadence, the dominant goes to the tonic. And I go to the northeast of Brazil and you don't have this sequence. Da, 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 da. So you have a subtonic, not a subtonic, not a subtonic, not a sensível, como se diz
a leading tone.
A leading, like in C, in Simei, B to C. We have B flat. So when I start to compose and I start to write like this, my professor said, no, it's wrong. It's not correct. And one of my first compositions were Nova Canção. Canto o novo canto da terra, de todo que ama e espera, Senhor, a tua reconstrução. And the professor said, oh, you need to bring the phrase up, not down. Because the melody in Portuguese have lots of melodic music, melodies coming down, not just going up. So we have the music is a language, and we can, to say it shortly, we have several jargões, como é que diz?
Jargon.
Hein?
Jargon.
No jargon. In a language, we have like in France, we have French, but we have, or in Austria, and in French, we have Alsace, the region of Alsace, they speak another, with...
Idioms?
No, idioms. I don't know. It's another language inside of a language.
Dialect.
Dialects.
Thank you, Michael.
Dialects, musically speaking. So we cannot say this is the Brazilian song.
Yeah.
This is the Brazilian instrument. Of course, guitar is very useful. But again, the school, we need to improve our schools because the teacher of music doesn't go according to our culture, goes from imported models. The models for teaching music are imported.
Yeah, I have my experience when I was in college. I was getting a degree, a double major in conducting and composition at the School of Fine Arts, Escola de Belas Artes. And I was also in the Conservatory of Brazilian Music in Curitiba. And I was doing both at the same time. And sometimes it's like they were completely different worlds that didn't, even like the Brazilian music classes in my college were about European like Brazilian music history. So we weren't studying Brazilian idioms. A lot of what Simei says makes so much sense. Melody behaves different. So it takes you in a different direction. One way of thinking about the Latin American thing is that there are musical flows back and forth, right? So there is some commonality, but Brazil is so big that a lot of times in Latin America, when we say in Brazil, when we say Latino, we mean everyone else who speaks Spanish, but it's not us. So here in the US, when I'm trying to identify, like on a government form, it's like Hispanic, Latino, other, I don't know, it's true. It's such a different way. And I think there's the Andean divide as well, right? The Andes and the way that the indigenous populations distributed themselves differently according to the geography of South America. And then you have the Caribbean and the Central American countries. I mean, it's so different. I don't think it's useful to lump everything together, but it's also a lot of work to take things apart, right, Brian?
Well, yeah, and maybe this brings us back to near the beginning. Mike McMahon asked you mentioned that the slave trade influenced our cultures in different ways between Brazil and North America. And I remember learning that the berimbau, which I was like, that's Brazilian, wasn't Brazilian. It came from South Africa and the Southern Africa. And I was like, what? Anyways, so maybe that would be a place to go to talk about the different musical. Why did that affect congregational song, I guess, is the question that Mike asked.
We need another webinar.
Yeah.
It's a big
Why is that? That should be simple. All right. Well, so Marcell, do you all want to wrap things up? Does that feel like a good spot to land? And we'll work on decolonizing another time.
Well, I just want to say, Simei, thank you for your willingness to talk, not only today, but to share your story and for the conversations we have. Thank you, Brian, and the Center for Congregational Song, the Hymn Society, for in these past couple of years, I've really felt welcome at home at the Hymn Society, and it's a place where I think we're having very important conversations. Thanks for all you do, for all the work you do. Simei?
I would like to thank also the Hymn Society and Brian and Michael and others, and Marcell, for giving me this opportunity to express a little bit my experience. So I would like to thank you very much, because this opportunity is very special in this moment for us, because we are different people, but we are suffering together. So I would like to ask you to pray for us here. In Curitiba, we are passing for a very tough time, and the situation is really chaotic, and we are not happy. So I'm not feeling happy now. But I trust in God, and trust in you, and I trust in hope. I have hope, and I would like to have more opportunity to share about this understanding of Brazilian, what means to be Brazilian, because the fact is that we are not Hispanic because not came any from Spain. We are not Indians because we are not came from India, so was a mistake. That is felt that it was coming to India, it was not. We are not Latino. It's very old Latin. Portuguese comes from Latin, but it has a lot of Gaelic roots. And so Portugal is the port of Gallia. So some in the past, we need to recover some of our Gallo ethnical root. So, and we are very complex, but it's wonderful when we have a possibility to express and to speak about something we are trying to do. And just a little bit, as an artist, I'm not very much concerned about doing something really Brazilian. As an artist, contemporary artist, I want to mix a little bit. So I think it's good. It's not a cultural appropriation if I use elements for indigenous culture. I'm not really indigenous. I have an indigenous background, but why not to use just to remember they existed. So if I take a melody from the indigenous and I build a song in it, I'm not doing nothing bad, you know? So as an artist, I would like to say that we are free to create, to recreate, and to experiment new things.
Behold
Thank you both on behalf of the Hymn Society and personally. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I hope I've already seen things in the chat saying thank you. I would invite everyone to make sure to put April 8th on your calendars. That's our last webinar of this series. Mike McMahon will lead a panel on singing as the journey continues. So thank you both, Simei and Marcell, for being here and just blessing us with all you know. And I look forward to the next conversation.
Ryan, good to see everyone. See you at the conference.
Take care.
Oh,